In this DBT Quick Tips video, we're going to be covering the skill of radical acceptance. In my previous video, I covered an introduction to this skill, and I really encourage you guys to go check that one out because this skill is often very misunderstood, confusing it with just going along and agreeing and giving up, which it definitely isn't. This skill is a primary and incredibly powerful distress tolerance skill and can really save you a lot of suffering and heartache. Now again, just to cover what radical acceptance is not. It is not approval. It's not passivity. It's not loving the people that hurt you or being compassionate to wrongdoers. And it's not against being changed. Often radical acceptance is the first step in being able to change the world around you. You kind of think of it as a major perspective shift where you might be beating your head against the wall, you might be trying as willfully as you can to make the world the way you want it. And because you're so focused on that one solution, that one way it has to be, it makes you blind to the world around you. It makes you blind to the other possible solutions that could be just as effective, if not more. You can almost imagine it as a metaphor, looking down this long, dark hallway. The lights are out. There are these automatic lights that when you move forward, the lights turn on along with you. And if you're willing to accept that there's darkness, and if you're willing to move forward despite that, to accept the situation as it is, well, those lights turn on, and you're going to notice down that long hallway, there are doors lining up on all sides of you. That those doors are possible solutions to fix the problems that you're suffering under. So that's what radical acceptance is. And what gets in the way of being able to exercise this skill? Well, one is you might not have the skills. You might not have actually developed how to put this one into action, and this is exactly what we're going to be covering in this video. Another aspect here that might be getting in the way is you might have a belief it just doesn't work. Beliefs are powerful things. Like I said, thinking about that metaphor of the long, dark hallway. If you don't believe there are other doors that you can go through, if you don't believe there are other solutions, well, you're not going to try them. Thinking about flat earthers, there's no way those guys are going to get on a ship because they're afraid of falling off the other side of the earth. That's just going to be the way it is. You wouldn't expect anyone to want to be suicidal. They believe the earth's flat. So there has to be a belief shift, a perspective shift, in order to make this skill work for you. And lastly, emotions definitely get in the way here. We do get so overwhelmed. We do get filled with rage, distracted by our sadness, that it's hard to think this one through. So I encourage you to go back to the tips skills in that video describing ways of trying to get an immediate reboot of your emotional well-being to get focused and centered really quickly so that you would be able to use this skill, radical acceptance, to turn the tide in the moment and to not get bogged down in more suffering. So I encourage you to check out that video. So there are 10 steps to actualizing radical acceptance practically as a skill. The first is going back to our mindfulness skill of observe, and just observe, notice, and describe to yourself how you're saying it should be this way, it ought to be this way. See how sticky that is. See how that thought is keeping you stuck. Notice how it's gripped you, and maybe it would be better to not be there. So that's step one. Just putting the cards on the table and seeing that's what your mind's telling you. The second step is reminding yourself that the unpleasantness, the what you don't like about what's going on in reality right now can't be changed. It is the way it is. The bus driver did yell at you. The taxi driver did shortchange you. And it's over now. That's what happened. And you can't go back to rewrite history. Now you can do things to protect yourself in the future, and that's great. But you can't go back in time to fix what already occurred. The third step here is reminding yourself that you live in a cause and effect world. Things unfold the way they do because of that fact. We might not like it, and that's okay to not like it. But 9 times out of 10, it couldn't have been any other way. That taxi driver had a bad day. Maybe he's a taxi driver because he failed math. It makes sense he shortchanged you. There's no way of getting around that one. So trying to fight that just doesn't make any sense. It should have been he shortchanged you, because the guy can't subtract and add. The next step here is trying to, with your whole being, with your mind, your body, and your spirit, accepting what's going on right now. The first couple steps here have been very much in your mind, thinking about how this makes sense. But we need to enlist the whole body. Open up your hands, literally, as though you're receiving what's going on right now. Maybe give a half smile. Trying to use biological cues of openness and receivingness that will help turn around the emotions you're feeling. Now, I know it feels a little bit like it's a fake out, but every little bit helps. Maybe praying about it, going to a place that actually makes you feel better about your life. Maybe you have a particular memory that just puts you in a good mood. Those are great places to go, as opposed to staying in that it should have been, it ought to have been frame of mind. The next step is practicing opposite action. Now, opposite action is literally, putting on a piece of paper, listing all the things you do when you're not being accepting. You yell, you fight, you complain, you write a letter to the boss, you demand to speak to the manager. Now do the exact opposite of everything on that list. Again, enlisting the whole body here, the last skill. When you're upset, you're probably not smiling. So you better smile. It's literally forcing yourself into a completely different world, a completely different way of responding. And then noticing, well, wait a second, when I act opposite to how I usually act, wait a second, I see I'm feeling better. Mindfulness is key here. The next step is figuring out, as a cope ahead, knowing these things the things that upset you, the things that really rub you the wrong way will be happening in the future. And sitting down and creating a literal script, a narrative of what you will say and do in those situations, not to fall into the shoulds and the rigid criticalness is key here. When your wife is once again, late in fixing dinner, you're going to give her a dirty look. You're going to probably say something that is veiled criticism. So give her a hug. Tell her you appreciate the food she's putting on the table. That's going to happen because that's what always happens. So just do differently. But you're creating a script. You can literally put that script in your wallet, in your pocket, and pull it out. Create a checklist of what you ought to do. It's a good way of thinking of ought instead of what ought to have been. What ought you do now to turn this thing around? The next step is to focus on your bodily sensations, to notice how you're probably feeling a lot of tension, and to do those self-care skills we've talked about in previous videos, to relax, to self-soothe, to distract yourself. Another part of radical acceptance is allowing what is to be. There is going to be disappointment. You are going to feel upset. You will be sad. And a lot of energy is expended fighting those feelings. And when we fight them and deny them, they only become that much more powerful. Being willing to let those feelings come into you, to literally open up your hands and say to yourself, I will accept this. I will have this, can help turn this one around and not allow your life to go off the rails. The next step, Not exactly positive thinking, but again, is being real with yourself is that, well, life is worth living. Despite all the things, despite all the hardships, you're still here. And you're still here for a reason. It must be life is worth living on some level, that you're willing to go through this. And instead of losing hope, focus on those things that you are grateful for. It's a great practice to once a week to make a gratefulness list. What are you grateful for? Maybe calling up a friend once a week and sharing with them what you really appreciate about the day or the week. Those sorts of things are powerful to reorient yourself back into a life worth living. And the last step is literally having, pulling out the pros and cons skill that we discussed in previous videos, where you're framing, well, what are the pros and cons of being willful and staying with the shoulds and oughts, as opposed to what are the pros of not, and using this skill of radical acceptance, using the gratefulness skills, using the self-soothing skills, using all the things I've listed today in this video, which ultimately is a better course of action for you, and using that to leverage your intellect to help your body get on board with doing something that will actually make you feel less pained and feel less suffering. I hope this video was helpful. If you like it, go ahead and give it a like or share it with your friends. If you want to share your experience using this skill, what it was like, what problems that came up when you're trying to put it into action, go ahead and shoot me an email or put that in the description box and I'll try and help you out. And you can check out my Patreon account to support my work here. I'll see you in the next video.